Hey everyone, happy Monday. I hope everyone had a great weekend and a great week last week. Have people been tracking? So I saw today, well, there's this new Doge tracker thing on Twitter. I'm sure people have probably been following along with Doge, Department of Government Efficiency in the US. It's one of those things you either love it or you hate it, but people are definitely talking about it. And Polymarket, which is a prediction market, application, launched this Doge tracker thing where they're like organizing all the different things. It was supposed to come originally from the Doge X account, and I guess they had some like other sources. But some of these tweets have been going viral, kind of similar to, I think, a lot of their stuff during the election last year went viral. But that was mostly around prediction markets. Now it's about trying to bring transparency to government spending. And, they've been pulling mostly, it was supposed to be from the X Twitter. And then I saw there was a tweet this morning that went viral, had 4 million views. And then the person had to actually delete the tweet because it had some inaccurate information. But I think it's really interesting to see, how much we need the ability to just organize knowledge in real time and ideally make it, something that people can trust. I mean, crazy, something like this can just go viral, 4 million people view it, and then like they realize, oh, actually this number, we don't even know where it came from. So, I think the tools that we're building could really help address that. I mean, it's another super interesting area for us to pay attention to. Because I wonder how much new information is going to get made available through this efficiency push. They might actually start publishing more transparency and more information about budgets, but that stuff still needs to be organized, right? You can have, an Excel spreadsheet or something, but what were the outcomes from this line item? All this kind of stuff we'd want to kind of organize so people can better understand it. So maybe some interesting project work for people here if you want to dive deeper into that. But cool. I think we're probably at a good place to get started for today. People can keep trickling in. We'll post the video afterwards. So thank you everybody for your submissions for the week one. There've been some really great submissions, so it looks like people are off to the races, which is really great to see. And today we're going to be diving deeper into GRC-20. So we're going to get a little more specific about knowledge graphs, how they're structured. I'm going to give a tour of Geo Genesis so you can see what it looks like when this stuff is kind of interconnected and part of where we're going towards. And then we'll introduce the focus for this week, for week 2. So welcome to week 2. All right, and we're going to dive into knowledge graphs and GRC-20. So people are probably familiar with this concept of triples. If you've looked into knowledge graphs at all, there's a standard called RDF, which up until now has been kind of the main standard for knowledge graphs. And it was and it also uses this triple format. Sometimes the names people use for these is different. You can have like predicate, subject, it's a different set of things. Here we use entity, attribute, value. Object is the third. And the way that we do it is different than some of these knowledge graph systems, because sometimes these knowledge graphs are meant to be local graphs. So, it's just for your one application. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to create a global graph, right? A global graph that can serve many different applications, and where you could have an indexer that's indexing, many different spaces, all in the same database, and everything is kind of interconnected and interlinked. And we want this to be something where, you can evolve these applications, you can evolve the data over time. And so the way we do it is we have an entity, attribute, and value, right? So let's say we want to record a data point about Albert Einstein. So there would be an entity ID that represents Albert Einstein. Right? And anytime you want to talk about Albert Einstein, you use this ID. Let's just start here real quick and let's discuss the IDs a little bit. It's an interesting choice. So what we've landed on for IDs is that we don't actually need a fancy scheme. You know, there's DIDs, there's all of these kind of different things, because essentially all we need is a unique identifier, and the uniqueness is actually enforced at the governance layer. And you know, we haven't really gotten into governance yet, but there's governance of this knowledge graph. And so that's where things like this uniqueness can kind of be enforced. And so really what you need is just, you know, a globally unique ID. And actually having a somewhat shorter ID is better for databases, so it can be more performant. And so what we, and then we want this to be something that, you know, it's a trade-off between it's good for machines and it's good for humans as well, that you can kind of you know, copy and paste and like read these IDs, that they're good for humans. By the way, if we have any mods on the call, if we could mute, you know, participants that aren't speaking, that would be helpful. I'm not a mod of this meeting. So what we do for the IDs is we start with a UUID v4, we strip out the dashes, and we do a base 58 encoding. And that's how we get to this. Sorry, Elizabeth, or do we know who created this meeting? Do we have someone who could mute? Inua Sanusi? If you wouldn't mind muting. Thank you. All right. So this is how we kind of, you know, how you generate a random ID. And so you, in this case, the first person who wants to talk about Albert Einstein can essentially create an ID for Albert Einstein, and then other people could be like, yeah, that's the Albert Einstein I'm talking about. They can use the same ID, right? And governance is part of like what helps people like find things or create some legitimacy behind things that people might want to converge on, and you get this entity ID. All right. Then let's say that we want to describe Albert's birthday. So there's a birthday attribute that somebody's created. And this attribute is itself its own entity. You know, for this property. And it also has a globally unique ID because it's an entity just like any other entity for the birthday attribute. And so anytime you want to reference somebody's birthday, you would use this attribute ID. And anything that has a birthday, you know, maybe your dog has a birthday, your dog's not a person. Maybe, you know, anything that has a birthday, you'd use the same attribute ID. And then finally, if there's a specific you know, value for the birthday, then that's kind of the third part of the triple. And so here with these three little data points, you now have an atomic fact that you can assert. And what's powerful about using triples instead of having just something that's more like relational based is that you can assert any type of fact about any type of entity and it's valid, right? So let's say that tomorrow somebody's, you know, doing something for, you know, for barbers, and they want to know what was Albert Einstein's hair color and what was his, like, you know, did he have curly hair or whatever. They can create an attribute for that, and they can say Albert's hair color was this, and they could give it a value, and that's valid, right? Even if, right, so you're not like bound to these, you know, strict types. So you have this kind of flexibility. And then similarly, you know, if you're building an application and you have different things that you want, you know, pieces of information you want to add to different things, you can put together a set of these triples and you can publish them, and that knowledge is valid, right? Regardless of whatever the structure might be at that time. And so it's very powerful as an atomic unit to allow lots of different applications, right, to be publishing content. Different apps, what they care about might change over time, but all of that information is valid. and can be indexed and can become part of the graph and can be used by other applications. So that's the idea behind triples. Now, we have a few native types that we've defined as part of the GRC-20 spec. And we've given them names that can be more easily understood by normal people, because we think part of what's going to happen with Web3 is we're going to have more and more people that are empowered to interact directly with these information systems. So, maybe you don't need to be a developer to use Web3. And so we want to make it accessible. So, these are the names we've come up with for these things. So we have text, right? And that could be short text or long text, any kind of strings is what we would usually call them in programming, right? Numbers, same, it can be any kind of number, floating point, integer, positive, negative, it's just a number, also with, optional formatting. Checkbox, this is what we call our Booleans. So a checkbox can be, true or false. A URL, right? So this would follow, there'd be supported kind of protocols. So at the beginning, you can link to HTTPS links with this kind of a URL, but generally we try to push people towards decentralized storage, IPFS, or right now our indexer doesn't support Arweave yet, but this could be IPFS or Arweave for the URLs, or yeah, you can reference HTTPS. Time, which can be a date or a time or both. And then a point, which could be like a geolocation. Most commonly, a point would be used for geolocations, but this could also be used for different coordinate systems. If you're building a game, a virtual world, or something like that, you can have a point that works for that coordinate system as well. So these are the base types, the native types that we have defined. And would love to kind of open this up. This is, a great opportunity with, a bunch of developers here participating in this hackathon, for you to be able to provide feedback on these native types. I will share out a link to the spec. You can take it and check it out. And what would be useful is as you're starting to ingest the content, right, for your projects into your local databases, just think about which of these native types you would map each field to, and make sure that you have everything that you need. I believe that you should. So these are the native types. Now that's separate from relations, and so now I'll kind of describe relations. So we can have entities, and we have these triples. And those triples, the values of those triples are one of those native types. And then you can have relations between entities, right? So for example, we can have that James, the spouse is Anita, and maybe spouse here is a relationship. You could call this is married to. There's different kind of naming conventions, and we can play with some of the naming conventions a little bit. It's more graphy to be like James is married to Anita. So you have this relation. And then, so this is like the edges in a graph, right? If a graph has nodes and edges connecting them. And then we have what's called a property graph model, where you can have properties about the relations, right? So if you have James, right, James might have his interests, and Anita might have her interests, but then maybe somebody wants to add, what are the shared interests between these two people? And Almeida, can you please mute? Everybody, if you're not muted right now, this would be a great time to just mute so that we don't have to hear sounds. Almeida, I don't know how to pronounce that. Thank you. Okay. So, so with these relations, you can add, these properties to the relations themselves, and that's really powerful, as we'll see. And that's something that it's a very graphy thing. Even the first versions of knowledge graphs didn't have this, right? So RDF, for example, doesn't actually have this property graph model, but it's really great. So just a small thing on the nomenclature. Uh, so we kind of have these two terms, attributes and properties. And we're starting to phase out most of where we use attributes, where the attributes, we use them really to refer to the actual triples. So if you have a triple, and it's that EAV, the attribute ID is that's what we're referring to when we say attributes, and that's related to an actual triple. Uh, and then we use properties to refer to the combination of kind of your attributes and your relations, right? So for example, as a person, I might have an attribute like my birthday, right? That's just an attribute. And then I might have relations, right? Like and technically it's a relation types to like, like where I work, right? So works at, for example, is a relation. And so together these are my properties, right? This is my eye color, this is where I work, these are all properties about me. But some of them, right, are relations to other things. Some of them are like, just native values. And so we just use properties to refer to both of those types of things. Hopefully that makes sense. So then we have things like images. And an image, basically, we treat internally as its own entity. So there's an image entity type. And then you'd have like the image URL, which this, we don't actually want this to be a .com, right? So this should really be like an IPFS link. And I didn't catch this. So this should be like an IPFS link, right, to the image. But then the nice thing is by treating the images as entities themselves, we can have metadata, right? So we could source, here's where I got the image from, here's the license for this image, here's the author of the image, right? So we can do attribution, which I think is really important. And you can have the width and height, any other metadata like that. So it's quite powerful if in the future people want to build more advanced like intellectual property systems, ways to, whether you're finding ways to, reward the creators of images or whether it's just purely for attribution. I think it's going to be a much better web, right? When we have proper attribution. And so anytime someone links to an image, they're actually linking to the entity ID. You can grab the image or you can view the metadata for that image. So that's how we handle images. So for now, when you're downloading images, think about this, that you want to grab, the source of the image, the author, things like that. And so with that kind of starting point, now we can start to add higher level structure to our information, and that's where the types come in. So types define a set of properties that may exist on a type of thing, right? So if Golden Gate Park is a place and it is a park, so it can have multiple types. And then the place type could define a set of properties and the park type could define its own set of properties. And then if an entity has both of these types, then it has the combination of all of those properties. And so, the core thing here, right? This is different than many of these type systems in that an entity can have many types and that it works more like a mix-in system where you're kind of mixing in all of the properties of all of the types. And we don't do strict enforcement. So an entity, right, has these types, but it could have other properties, it could have other triples set on it beyond what these types define, right? And so much more flexible than a relational database. I'm sure, you've had this situation constantly where you're trying to put data into a database, the database yells at you, hey, this isn't, the schema, this doesn't match the schema. And within an organization, that's fine, and it can help you, but there's other ways that you can deal with that, right? And here it's really around governance. Like if there's bad data that's going in, you can just fix it. You can just, have governance even either before it gets approved and before it goes in. IGZO, can you please mute? Okay, we're gonna just ask everybody to take a moment and mute right now. Thank you. All right, um, so this is something that can be handled really at the governance level, right? It's the job of governance to ensure the quality of the knowledge in all of the public spaces. But by not having the strict typing, you allow for much more flexibility and lots of different applications that can be built on top of shared data. So these primitives basically allow you to form a graph, right? You have these entities, they have types, and then there's relations, right, between the different nodes, right, the different entities, and this is our graph. So does this all make sense as explaining the core concepts behind GRC-20 knowledge graphs? Amazing. Um, so why don't we take a look at this in action? So a few weeks ago, we announced and launched Geo Genesis for early access. We've been onboarding, our first users. We've been going kind of slow to make sure that everything is polished before we scale this up. So right now we don't have a ton of content on here yet, but this is a new deployment that is our main net, where we have spaces, public spaces, personal spaces, and some initial knowledge that we're organizing. We have a group of geo explorers, we call them, who've been organizing content and knowledge on geo. They've been doing a really great job, and they've been focusing a lot on the crypto space. So for this hackathon, we've got some folks that are focused on jobs for specific industries. We've got some folks that are focused on education and some on regions. Right. So, the crypto industry is an industry like any other. It happens to be the one that most of us are in. And we've been experimenting with how to organize knowledge for the crypto industry. And so, for example, we have news. And here you can, stay up to date on the latest news in crypto. And if we click on one of these, we'll see, so this is a news story, right? That's the type, is news story. This is an entity, it has a name and it has a cover image. And if we come down, we can see these are the properties, right? So for this news story, we see types news story, we see the published date, and then we see some sources. Right, so here there's two original sources that led to this kind of news story. And I could click on one of these sources and I can see this is an article. Right, so this source is an article. I can see the authors of this article and I can see the publisher. Similarly, right, here's the other one. And if I want to see, for example, what are the, I don't know, what we have tables up there, but what are the properties on a news story? I can see that a news story has related projects, it has tags, it has related spaces, it has maintainers, published date, related entities, location, right? So this gives us kind of the structure of what a news story can have, but of course it can have more than that. We can see here upcoming events. We can see, projects, people, and jobs. We're going to get started on jobs. We haven't updated this part yet. So it'll actually be fun to look a little bit deeper at something like the graph. Now, here I want to show a really cool feature that you might have seen me just do something here. And this is something that we do that I haven't really seen anyone else do well. And this is the concept of pluralism. So each space has its own view of the knowledge graph, right? And part of what we want to do is decentralize how communities can form, they can organize knowledge and information, right? We want all of the knowledge to be interconnected, But we want to give communities freedom to organize things the way that they want, right? They may agree with other people or they may not. And so you should be able to create your own views on whatever it is that you care about, but we want all of the information to be interconnected, right? And so the way that we do that is with pluralism. So here, when you're on any entity page, at the top, you can see all of the different spaces that have a point of view on this entity, right? So, the crypto space has a point of view on the graph, and maybe this is just the metadata that it has for the graph. But then the graph might actually have its own space as well, right? So here is a space for the graph protocol, and it has, its own kind of tabs. Um, and um, and so we could see, for example, projects that are in the graph ecosystem. And we can see, for example, people right now. And so we've just started to set this up, but we want to be onboarding our core devs very soon onto this. But you can see how you can start to aggregate things up. And what you'd want to do is actually aggregate things up, starting from an individual person, an individual company, up through the protocols and the ecosystems that they're participating in, all the way up to the industries, maybe all the way up kind of globally. So, this is part of when you have this interconnected graph where everything is interconnected, right? So here, for example, right, I just jumped over to the geo. I clicked on that and it took me to the geo space. So I can always see what space I'm in. And here we have a job opening, right? Product engineer at Geo. And if I come down, I can see, right? So there's each entity has a content area, right? And so this is, similar to Notion. If you've used Notion, you have a block-based editor model for the content, and then you have the properties. So mostly right now in this hackathon, we're focusing on the data, right? These properties. We published a spec, right? The GRC-20 spec really covers basically this, right? It's how to define knowledge and the properties. Now, everything in Geo is just knowledge. So even the type system is defined as just knowledge. And so is the content. So, this list of blocks, that's just knowledge. And you can actually query that through the same API to get the information about the blocks. So, let's see how we're doing throughout the hackathon. If people want to add content like this as well, we could empower you to do that. But we haven't published the spec, the content spec yet. So maybe that's something we can do soon. But here, right, we can see for this job opening, right, there's relations, right? So the project is Geo, the roles is product engineer. Right now, this product engineer, if I click on, and then there's skills, right? The skills is TypeScript. So if I click on the product engineer right now, there isn't much here. But this just jumped us over to the software space, right? Because the software space is probably the best source of truth on, software related jobs and skills. And so this is an example here where, right, we want to be organizing the skills, we want to be organizing the roles. And then when people are onboarding onto Web3, right, maybe they're adding their own skills, maybe they're adding their own roles. You have autocomplete, right? So if I'm looking up, Neo4j, I can see that it's a skill in the software space, right? You'd also want to see probably Neo4j should also probably be like a database, right? So the database Neo4j and the skilled Neo4j, maybe they're two different things. And this is an example of, where it gets interesting to start thinking through ontologies of like, what are the same things? What are different things with the same name? Personally, I feel like the skill and the database are two separate things. And in an ideal world, I could, click on the Neo4j skill and I could see, different courses or places where I could learn that skill, things like that. maybe I could, see information about how in demand the skill is. So in every industry, we want to organize the roles, we want to organize the skills, um, and and we can link that to like the job openings. And then when people create their personal spaces, right? So if I go to my personal space, here I've got things like posts, I've got my current work, my past work, and skills, so I have more that I could add, but right now there's one skill here. So kind of like LinkedIn. But what's cool is we can look at kind of relations. So at this point, everybody's kind of familiar with you click on something, it takes me to that thing, right? This is how most things work. In this case, it took me here to the graph space. But what you haven't seen before is relations, right? So that takes me to the entity, but now I have a place where I can go specifically for the edge, right? So I'll go to the geo one as an example. So now I'm on the relation page, right? So this is a page that is specifically about the relation between me and the geo company, right? And so relation can only have one type. So, with other entities, we said that entities can have many types, but a relation can only have one type, right? So, and here Yaniv Tal works at Geo. Now, if I had another relation to Geo, that would just have to be a separate relation. So you can have multiple relations between the same entities, but they would have to have, you'd want them to have different entity types, or sorry, relation types. And so a relation, right, it has the from and the to, right? It's from Yaniv to Geo. It also has an index, and this is using fractional indexing. We should share a little bit more about how these indexings or these indexes can be generated. But the idea here is basically the relations can be ordered. And this fractional indexing is how you set the relative order of the different relations, right? So here, roles, and there's two relations, founder and CEO. So what I would want is to be able to control which one shows up first, right? What's the order? And that's set with this index. This is a powerful way of setting ordering in a way that's decentralized, and different people can change the order, and you're going to end up with a deterministic ordering, even if people are editing things at the same time. Um, so that's pretty powerful. We don't have the ordering actually implemented in this UI yet. It's something we have to do, but we'll be doing it soon. And so here you can see the additional properties, right? So the fact that I'm a founder and CEO, that is a property of my relationship to Geo, right? In probably most systems you've seen, those would have been properties maybe on me, but that's not really an accurate representation of these things, right? Because and if I've worked at 10 different places saying, Yaniv is a CEO or something, it's like, of what? So really, you want to have the properties on the right things. In this case, these are properties of the relation. Similarly, when did I start working at Geo, right? That's a property of the relation. So what you'll find when you start thinking about these knowledge graphs and this way of modeling things as entities with relations, and that you can have properties on the entities or on the relations, you'll find that it actually maps much closer to, the way the real world works. It ends up becoming much more natural, right? There's a little bit of a learning curve to start thinking in this way to start, but it's actually an accurate way to model the world. And we can build much more precise information systems using this kind of knowledge graph structure. Any questions about that part? And then what's great, right, is because this is an interconnected graph, we can be publishing things. So I publish these blog posts to my own personal space, right? If I click on this, I can see that this is a blog post. It's published here, and it has beautiful content. but then it can get aggregated. So here on this post, I set the authors, right, as Geo and myself, related projects, the graph, Geo, related spaces, the graph, and this can now be aggregated. So, on in geospace, and this is an issue we have to fix there. In geospace, right, they can have a set of posts and they can aggregate all of the posts that are relevant to geo that I can see in the geospace. Or for the graph, they can do the same thing, right? So I can search for the graph and the graph can also aggregate. But right now, we're not aggregating it yet because we haven't onboarded folks yet. But this thing where you can aggregate content across this interconnected web, and then this would have, for example, posts from all the different core devs or other projects that are in the graph ecosystem, and they could all get aggregated into one place, right? That's super powerful. Okay, so just to go to cover a little bit more about, so we looked at industries, right? And how industries, ideally, right? So here's a top level, right? Would have things like news, events, projects, people, and jobs. We can look at regions. So here we have a space for the city of San Francisco, right? So it's a city and it's a region. And we have a home page. You can see the neighborhoods. We can see different information that we want to surface on the home page. And then in the case of San Francisco, it also has news, right? So here's the latest news for the city of San Francisco. It has its own upcoming events, right? So there's a film festival coming up. It has places, right? So maybe you'd want to find, all the different shops and retail, coffee shops, restaurants, things like that. Right, here's some trending restaurants. So these are all just places. You can have culture, right? Things like musical artists, architecture, performing arts. You can have different categories of arts. Activities, what are fun things to do? And also jobs, right? So right here, another example, right? Maybe we're hiring in San Francisco, so this pops up here, but you'd have, all the different companies and job opportunities in the city of San Francisco, right? You might want to aggregate things in different ways, right? According to geography, according to industry, lots of different ways. We can index it and we can surface it in all those different ways. And then we have goals. And this is something that, our team is working on because we want to use these tools to make an impact. And we're focusing on homelessness in San Francisco. We're going to be organizing a lot more content related to that here. And so at a local level, people can get involved, right? And they can help make their cities better. And ideally, right, like if people need to do work, there should be new job opportunities that help to achieve the goals that the residents of a city care about. And we should be able to organize all of that transparently on chain. But there's also, arts and culture and fun things to do and all that kind of stuff that we can also be organizing here. So that's an overview of, right, this is an example. This is like one city, but you could do the same thing at the state level, at the country level. Maybe there's different things that you want to organize at a country level. Maybe you're not as interested in places, right? Maybe that's more a local thing. But maybe at the level of a country, it's much more about the government, or maybe it's, other things. So that's an example of regions. And then we could look at academic fields. So something like, here, let's switch over to the computer science space, right? So an academic field can also have news, right? And here I try to separate, I think, like papers from news, because a lot of news is like something was just discovered in this academic field. Most of that comes out through like papers or articles. But maybe there's news about the field itself, you know. So here's a change to like a major university changing their computer science curriculum. So that's computer science news. You'd have things like courses, right? So maybe you have a course on algorithms, and you have these are like lessons. I don't have images for these right now, but these would be like lessons for this course. And so even just mapping out all the different courses and all the different lessons and topics, right? And how those relate to skills and jobs, you know, that's all pretty interesting. Um, we could be organizing, you know, papers, so papers from different journals. These are the, you know, here are the journals, here are different papers. Even just starting with like, you know, top level information is useful, maybe the abstracts. Obviously, you know, we can't just grab papers and pull them in as is, you know, you do run into, you know, licensing things. A lot of these papers are not like open, but you know, there's a base level of metadata, right, that we could have for all the papers. And we can extract out interesting claims, results, things like that from those papers. So that's an interesting thing to do. You could have top like researchers. So those are examples. So this is a starting point. It's not meant to, you know, be too prescriptive, but I think we do want to try to converge on some of the ontologies, right? So, you know, the types, the relations, the properties. Um, so we want to converge on that so that there's more consistency uh, between everybody. But then if you want to extend, you can do that too. And I think, I mean, it's better, ideally, we all kind of agree on what the properties and types are, but this is really meant to be a starting point. And from here, you know, if you have your own ideas and you have like more knowledge that you want to add, you can, right? Of course, you know, the stuff that we just talked about, that's kind of general, but each industry is going to have its own, you know, ontologies and its own things that are important for those industries, right? So if you're in real estate, you know, things about, okay, listings and property values and all of that stuff is going to be specific to real estate, right? Different fields are, you know, if you're in medicine, right? I mean, that's such a complex field and there's going to be so many different things related to, you know, drugs and medications and that kind of stuff. So you can define ontologies if you want for your own industries. It's really up to you how far you go. Um, but hopefully this kind of gives you a picture of what this could look like, that when all of this stuff is published, it should show up here, right? People will be able to browse it. It'll also be available on an open knowledge graph data service on the graph, and people will be able to build custom applications, right? That use all of that knowledge and information, and they can pull that into their own apps, and people can build their own customized apps. So that's an overview of Geo Genesis. I think one last thing that I would mention is, so when you search for things, you know, here I'm searching for San Francisco, right? What you see is the name, you see like what spaces it's in, you see its types, and you see a description. And so, and you'd also see, actually, I don't know why we don't show it here. We probably should. I guess we don't show the images right now. But having like a cover image or an avatar is pretty important. So every entity has a set of implicit properties, right? So if I create a new entity and that's the name, that's the description, that's the types, and that's the cover, these are the implicit properties. So we really want to, as much as possible, add these to everything, right? So if you see a description, this is a good way to format a description. It's short, you know, usually it's one sentence, maybe two max. It starts with a capital letter, ends with a period. So this is a good looking description here. And you can see why that's useful if I'm searching for things. You want to be able to quickly see what it is. A name generally doesn't have a period. Uh, a good thing to keep in mind is, as much as possible, we like sentence casing, right? So here, quality education, right? The education is lowercase. Revitalizing downtown, right? The downtown is lowercase. So sentence casing is preferred to title case. But if something is like a proper noun, like San Francisco, right, we use title casing. Um, and then the imagery makes a really big difference, right? I mentioned that. So in this case, this is what a cover looks like, right? So it's wide. We can crop it, but it's best to have something that presents well wide. It shows up in these dimensions. It also shows up here. You can see, the cards, right? Also use the cover images. Even here, we'll crop the cover images. So each entity, right? The cover is an implicit property, and this is kind of how it renders. And we also have avatars. So projects and people, for example, right? So if I look at like a person type, it defines the avatar property, right? The person type has an avatar. It has these properties. So the avatars are these more square things. So this is better for like a logo or a person. So if it's kind of square, you use the avatar. If it's more, for imagery, we use the cover. And that way we'll have like a much more beautiful web with imagery and previews, and you see what everything is, and it'll be really nice. All right, so let's look at the week ahead. So hopefully you've had a chance to identify a focus area and uh, maybe find a partner, or you're good hacking yourself. Otherwise, continue to reach out to us and we'll help try to get you sorted. Hopefully you were able to start looking at what data sources you wanted to use. So for week 2, we want to finish selecting your data sources. And we want to ingest that data into your database, right? And hopefully you also had a chance to set up your development environment. So if you've got a database and you've got ways to script stuff, and maybe you've already started scraping some information in. For this week, just anything that you think is interesting, you can put it into your database, and that'll also help to inform the structure, because then you'll know what information you have. And then we can try to get to agreement for people that are working in similar areas on, what the field should be called and that kind of stuff. And then from there, clean, structure, and enrich the data. So maybe you're getting some data from a data source, maybe you're getting, other data from other data sources, and you want to kind of link them together. So, you want to start to create some structure between that information. And enrich the data. So, names, descriptions, covers, things like that. And work on your automation tooling. Especially maybe you're a technical, person working with a non-technical person, or vice versa. Maybe the non-technical people can help with things like imagery, with, improving, maybe you're using AI for stuff, but a lot of times AI, it doesn't actually, it's not always perfect. So it's good to have a human go in and improve the language, make it sound natural, right? We want everything to be natural and pleasant to consume. And so tooling around this stuff is something that I'm personally very interested in, right? Like, how do we create stuff where people can review things, fix it, stuff like that. So, but any automation around, scraping, ingesting, all of that kind of stuff, I think that'll be kind of the focus of this week. And hopefully at the end of this week, you have a well-structured local database, however you want to structure it, with the relevant information that you want to include. And then next week, we'll focus on actually publishing that onto our test net for the knowledge graph. So that'll be a next week thing once you have your content organized locally. So a few considerations. make sure that you can publish the original content with proper attribution. So when we publish this stuff onto the graph, you're going to submit a series of edits, right? And each edit, it's going to have a set of triples, right? It's going to have your knowledge that you want to publish for that edit, and it'll also have a name. And you want to be able to like show the clear kind of history of what happened, right? And sourcing, I think, is important, right? So let's say that you're importing some papers from Archive. You want that initial import that has that information from Archive to be included in a single edit. So if you import the stuff into your database and then you write over it, then you're not going to know, okay, what actually came from that source and what came from me. So that becomes an interesting thing to think about in your automation tooling. Like how can you enrich the data and add more information without necessarily overwriting where the information came from? You want to kind of have your own like internal audit log, if that makes sense. So you can kind of track, okay, like these would be the edits. So you imported this metadata from Archive. Maybe there's a separate edit, adding cover images. Maybe there's a separate edit, link papers to relevant people in universities. And so it's easy for people to go through. They can see the history. They can see who did what, where things came from. All right. So next steps, make sure you filled out the week 1 form if you haven't. Please do that today. We've gotten a lot of them back, but not everybody's. So make sure you've done this. Make sure you finalize your focus area and team. Like right now, if you haven't done that yet, please send me or Charlotte an email. And then as you're going through, would love to see everybody on Discord this week. You can post your thoughts, you can post updates, and discuss any types and properties that you're finding. I think it's good to have a conversation on Discord, be like, hey, these are the properties I'm thinking of having for this type. These are the properties I'm thinking about for that type, and it'll be good to get some open discussion. We are going to be hosting an office hours. We haven't sent this out, but I think we're going to target the same time on Thursday for this week. So that'll be a good opportunity basically for people to ask questions, to showcase things. So if you can make it on Thursday, would love to see you there. And then starting next week, we'll have recurring breakout calls for each of the different focus area groups, the jobs, the education, and the regions. So you can demo your work with each other, learn from each other. And as we start publishing stuff next week, your work is going to intersect much more. And we go from having these individual databases to having this interconnected graph. All right. Any questions?
Hello, I have a question.
Please.
So one of my area of focus is real estate. I'm trying to piece everything together and how to ingest, blah, blah, blah. One of my main question is, as you know, listings is one of the main interesting data points. What kind of level of detail and liveness for the data are we looking at? Like, as you know, listings are very live. Every day there will be thousands of events. That new listing or a listing that disappear, which might be an event that it's sold, which might be very interesting for modeling, for info. It's like super valuable data. But does the GRC-20, the protocol and the governance support this kind of very high throughput?
Yeah, great question. So what I would say is let's just remember also that we are pretty early in all of this, and so we want to move a little bit slowly and methodically. Like, are we ready for terabytes of data? Definitely not. So let's not overload the system. The way to think about where we're at right now is like we're testing things out, we're structuring things, and we want to keep the quality high. And then once we get things well structured, then we can kind of grow and scale. So what I would say is some of the data that we've described is more static in nature. And some of it, like you said, is something that's maybe more live. So real estate listings, that's quite live. Job openings, that's also live, right? If the position is filled, it goes away. So for those, we want to have things like cron jobs, right? That are keeping those things up to date. Now, basically, what I would say is quality is more important than quantity. And so at this stage, I don't think we want to be like, here's all, 100,000 listings in California updated every 5 minutes. We'll probably crumble under that pressure, right? And also, maybe we didn't structure things right, and we're going to learn in this process. And if we've created 100,000 entities and we have to go and update them, like that's just going to create more work for ourselves. So let's treat this more as a proof of concept, and maybe you focus on like a single neighborhood, right? Or something like that. And maybe there's, 20 listings in that neighborhood, but you get the cron jobs going that keeps it up to date. And it's like, hey, for this neighborhood, we're going to have the up-to-date listings, and that's already really cool. And maybe we expand that to a city, right? And then we keep that up to date. So quality over quantity. For something like that, I would imagine a cron job. Maybe it's something that we want to keep updated. Maybe it's once a day to start. Maybe for some things you want it to be even faster than that. And when it comes to, how to get it actually updated quickly, the model here is we have public spaces and personal spaces. Getting changes through a public space is going to be a slower process. But the public spaces can aggregate things from the spaces that they trust. So let's say that you establish yourself as, hey, I'm like a real estate personal space, right? I'm a company or I'm a project, whatever, personal space. You can publish to your personal space and it gets updated right away, right? The second you publish, you don't need to wait for a vote, anything like that. It's right away, it gets indexed. And then if there's a public space that trusts you, then that should get aggregated. And so that's a way that the knowledge graph can update quickly.
Makes sense. And sorry, one last question. When you mention a cron job, are you mentioning like from the provider side, like my setup providing with a cron job base, or a cron job from the
That's right. So it's
service?
happening at the edges. It's not a core part of like the protocol. So it's the participants would have to set up the agents or
Oh,
the
okay. Perfect. Got it. Thank you.
Other questions?
Something came to mind actually while you guys were just talking. When it comes, by the way, I really like this whole geo thing and everything that you're doing with it. Two things come to mind right when I think about this, right? So we have current Web3 related projects that's already in the space that can use more attention. And then we also have just regular businesses that's not even in blockchain that can now be established, and then we can create an ecosystem for them as well. How can we still do this but also still distinguish ourselves different from like the event? I forget the other companies that do the localized events. I know they like charge subscriptions for like people to post if they're running events in their county, and you can see what they do over the weekends and stuff like that. Is this something that's going to be where the reason why I bring this up is because my buddy has a car club and he wants to in New Jersey, and he wants to bring more attention to like when tourists and people come to this area, how do they figure out what to do on the weekend, what's going on, and how they can be a part of it. So I was thinking like, wow, this could be a great opportunity to use this platform to build something like that, like on a personal page, and then just go one-on-one with individual different clubs, I guess, and say, hey, we can list out your region, what it is that you're involved in, any events, ticket price, or anything like that related to it. And if someone does come say, well, I can just already do that with X company or XYZ, what is it that you're saying, to just like say, how to distinguish yourself from what's already currently available? I'm super long question.
Yeah. So really, I mean, what we're building here is Web3, right? This is the Web3 vision. And the benefit of Web3 is that it's open, it's verifiable, and it's composable, right? So you could build on a centralized platform, but now you're taking on that platform risk, right? Any day that platform can change its terms and its rules. They can charge more, they can close off API access. So you're completely dependent on them, right? The beauty of this is that it's all open. It's all running on decentralized networks. You can build on top of it and you can know that you will always have access, right? You can always do things the way you want, right? It's an open platform. And then, the verifiability, right? The things, it's easier for people to trust the information because, it's cryptographically signed and it's published right on a blockchain. So you can verify for yourself that everything you're seeing is correct, hasn't been tampered with. So that's nice with the verifiability. And then the composability, I think that's really huge, right? Is that like, yeah, you can do it yourself if you want to take that on. But if it's open and it's composable, you can benefit from all of the work that other people are doing, right? And you can aggregate that. You don't have to do it all yourself, right? And then similarly, you can take the work that everyone else has done and you can customize it the way that you want, right? And that's really the beauty of composability. And so, you have these platforms right now that are these kind of one size fits all platforms, Eventbrite and Meetup. But how do I aggregate the things across the platforms? And can we enable people to build really customized applications, right? Because it's not going to be one size fits all. Your sports events app is going to look different than your, technical conference is going to look different than your musical performance event app, right? So to give people the ability to build customized apps that use shared knowledge and information, I think is going to be really powerful. And those are the network effects, and those are a lot of the benefits that you get from having, Web3.
And I just real quick on to double down on that. I like it because the way I see this can go, or I don't know if this is what you've thought of as well, but right. So imagine where we all have our wallets, we all have our browsers, and we log into Geo with our wallet, right? Your public address. And then so when you go into it, it lets you know like anything related to your wallet in your area or anything that's going on. And then you can interact with all of this now on on the
That's the
blockchain.
other thing, right? And you can have fully cut like personalized interfaces. And that's where things are going also with AI, right? Because it's so easy now. You can just tell AI what you want, and it can even make a custom user interface for you, right?
Yeah,
So it knows that you're into sports and music and that you want to do this type of work, and it can just make you a little dashboard of like all the relevant stuff for you, right? So I think we'll see all of that kind of stuff, which becomes possible when the knowledge is open and composable and you can access it however you want.
cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Derek.
there's
And
still
I know we're over time. I can keep going, so I'm happy to keep going if other people want to as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
and if there's some question in the text box, if you want to have a
Oh,
look.
great. I missed that. Sorry. Let's take Derek's question and then I'll read it in the chat.
Yeah, no problem. I also put it in the chat so you can skip over me once we get there. Just one question in terms of people that are working on related industries. Like someone mentioned that they want to work on real estate. If we're also working on real estate, how desired is it that we're coordinating on the different types that we're using and I guess sharing types across our two projects and stuff?
Yeah, so that's the sort of thing that I think like that's part of the big benefit of like public governance is you want to have different companies. And in this case, I mean, you guys, I'm sure, friendly and everything, but you can imagine in some industries, people are very competitive, but you want to have some base level of standardization. So that's why even competitive folks can participate in a public governance process for their industries, get to standardization for types and then kind of do their thing. And so that would be really great. So if you saw Noel, maybe you guys can find each other in Discord. Definitely, we want to have collaboration on types. And then also just for this hackathon, it's probably better if you divide and conquer. So, if you guys are maybe you're tackling different regions or things like that. So that's why it's better to let people know what you're working on so that you're not duplicating, but there's plenty of stuff for everybody to do. All right. Not sure about slippage. Okay, languages. So we haven't tested our language support yet. We do have an affordance for this in the GRC-20 spec where any text triple can include the language. But we haven't integrated it all through. So it's something that we'd love to do on a future hackathon. For now, the default is English, and apologies for that, but I know we'll want to get to internationalization soon. And hopefully we'll have some more engineers that can do that sort of thing soon. All right. And I'm not sure, I don't understand the slippage question, but hopefully I think we kind of got through it. So thank you, everyone. Super excited with how things went in the first week. I feel like a lot of people found some really great areas to focus on. Looks like there's some cool tech stacks in the work. Let's definitely collaborate this week as you're going through. Let people know what you're doing so we can learn from each other and we can start to standardize on some of our types. And then next week, we'll start actually publishing the stuff on the testnet and start building out this interconnected graph together. So yeah, thanks everyone. Have a really great week.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Catch you guys later.
you.